Okay, so I am tremendously excited to be able to introduce Hannu Rajaniemi, who's here. Hannu, when I first thought of who could we invite for collective intelligence, who could kind of take our thinking about collective intelligence to the next level, who would be the most inspiring person? I thought, oh, maybe it could be, someone who writes amazing work about collective intelligence. And I thought, oh, but what about my most favorite living science fiction writer? And I had to decide, but luckily they were the same person. And this was Hannu. And I think it really is like every single page. If you haven't had a chance, pick up The Quantum Thief. It's amazing. From the first page, there are ideas about collective intelligence, ranging from a literal prisoner's dilemma in which if you're in this prison, you get an extra copy of yourself every time you win one of the games. It's about privacy settings that are ingrained into your perceptual system. There are ideas here for almost every type of research that we could do. And I said, well, could we bring someone in like this who would be able to kind of let us see beyond where we typically see just looking at our own research? Can we pick our heads up a little bit? So I've had just the honor to work with Hannu over the last month or two. And not only is he going to speak, but he's actually been taking some of the work that I've sent him work that all of you are doing. And he's taken that and created something new that I do not want to set the bar too high for you here. I'm very sorry. But I am personally super excited to see what this is. So with that, please welcome Hannu.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And I must say it's great to be back here in Pittsburgh at the Collective Intelligence Conference 2039. And you're all looking so great. It's like you haven't aged at all in the last 20 years. But seriously, the last time I was here in 2019 was an important time for me personally. My wife and I were just starting to think about having children, and we were a bit scared because the world was pretty scary back then. There was this wicked ticking time bomb of climate change, our politics twisted by tech companies selling ads, and even the best case scenarios were kind of depressing. AI making the rich richer and taking meaningful work away from the rest of humanity. But being here in 2019 made me feel more hopeful. Maybe there was a way to turn things around. Maybe there was a way to build a better future for our children. And my daughter Lumi was born in 2020, and today she's 19 years old. And recently she told me that what she really wants to do with her life is ghost work. Now, to me, ghost work meant the kind of work that Mary and Mary's book was talking about 20 years ago. Mechanical Turk, repetitive work beneath the API, labeling images, cleaning up data, basically slave labor to ultimately make the AI work better. So I got pretty upset with her. What are you doing? I asked her. Your mom and I aren't rich, but we've tried to give you every possible opportunity. Free education in Finland, as much travel as we could afford with our carbon tokens, supporting all your hobbies. Why are you acting out like this? And you can imagine how well that went down. There's this little frustrated sound she makes. I think she picked up from her mom, like, which means, Dad, you're an idiot. And she said, I got accepted into the Frights. It's like getting a job at Google for your generation. It's one of the top ghost guilds. And I was actually kind of impressed she still remembered Google. But I didn't know what a ghost guild was. So I asked her. And it turns out that the MTurk workers and other types of ghost workers have never been these unsophisticated human robots beneath the API. And they've always used forums and messaging apps to communicate and to share the workload and help each other out and give advice and create a sense of community. So they've been a real collective intelligence from the very beginning. And in the last 10, 15 years or so, that got formalized. And now the ghost guilds are these powerful global digital co-ops, ghost workers who banded together to have more bargaining power. And the way it works is they have an internal reputation system called karma, basically tokens that give you status in the community and which you can give to others if they help you or do something very cool. And if the guild decides to go on strike, for example, karma can be used to enforce that with smart contracts. If you break the strike, you lose your karma. So as much as silly blockchain hype there was back in 2019, the killer app for cryptocurrencies actually turned out to be ghost work collective action. So I asked Lumi, what is the point of these guilds? What do they do? What are they good for? And she said, the point is that now they're in charge. It's the tech companies that have to pitch their projects to the guilds. And those projects had better be something really cool, something that the workers care about and find meaningful. Or at the very least, the companies have to provide better tools to the guilds that help them in other jobs too. So I said, okay, that sounds nice. But what do you actually do that makes you so valuable? And she said, breeding. And breeding of what? Breeding of everything, she said. And apparently, it started with this thing called the GAN breeder. Do you remember those neural network things that got kind of fashionable before we had the second AI winter? Now, one of the things they were pretty good at was learning continuous representations of images, taking a lot of input data and creating this high-dimensional map where every point corresponded to a possible image. GAN breeder was an app that allowed you to move around in that space, discover images, breed them together and create new ones. And usually they came out as interestingly surreal. You had alien creatures and landscapes like from Dune or creepy toys. And it seemed like a toy itself at first. But then people started doing very similar things with video. Now remember, in the mid-2020s, the rest of the world went online. All those mini satellites went up and we got another 3 or 4 billion people on the internet. And the first thing they wanted on their smartphones was entertainment. So to satisfy that demand, TikTok was the first company that started breeding short video clips, just mining this vast space of possible videos generated by a giant neural network. And that was actually a really interesting ghost work application. Going out there and finding these weird and funny short clips, combining them, filtering out the nonsensical ones, and then forming flash teams to edit them. And now, with this karma system, the ghost guilds had a bit more bargaining power. The workers were actually able to get some royalty micropayments for the really good videos that they found. And some guilds started implementing incentive schemes, like the Red Balloon Challenge, where they rewarded people who helped recruit people who were exceptionally good at finding videos. And that's when it really started to explode. And this model of breeding content, combination of ML and ghost work, turned out to be so successful that companies started applying it to everything. Fashion designs, product designs, new materials, architectural plans, even software. Same pattern, train an ML model to make this big solution space, and then have ghost workers explore it. And in fact, the sweet spot turned out to have a combination of humans and bots exploring it together. The bots could take you in completely novel directions, but you still needed human intuition to judge the quality. I'm sure you've seen some of the outcomes, like these morphing smart plastic housing for the homeless, these pine cone tents on the streets. That's the kind of thing you often get, counterintuitive, useful, and kind of biological. So I was looking at Lumi and trying to take all this in. And I asked, so you're like a human component of an evolutionary algorithm? Pretty much, she said. And how does that feel? Is it fun? And that's when her eyes really lit up. And she said, yeah, it's the best. I see these things and I feel smarter. I'm part of something bigger. It's kind of magical. And I still didn't get it. And she could see I got frustrated and said, it's probably better if I just show you. And I'm going to try to do the same. So at the time, Lumi was part of this Flash team that was breeding a new protein design, which is basically a smart drug molecule with a kill switch for cancer cells. And I could see why she joined that team. Her grandmother, my mother, died of metastatic breast cancer. And I'm going to share a screencast from one of Lumi's work sessions. Now, go on, and you can put on your mixed reality glasses in VR mode. Eyeglasses or big specs, it doesn't matter. I'll put on mine as well. And I'll show you what I saw. Looks like a lot of you have that plugin that makes other people's glasses invisible. It's pretty cool. But for those of you Luddites who don't have any glasses, you can just close your eyes and I'll describe what I'm seeing. We're floating in space. And there are countless dots of light around us. Some are far away, like stars, and some are closer, and you can see that they have a 3D shape. They look like asteroids, maybe. And there's glowing, branching pathways between them that pulse gently, brighter, dimmer, brighter, dimmer. Some of them are green, some are blue. The shade tells you if it's a path that human users have been following or bots. They're basically like the chemical trails the ants lay down when they look for food. And some trails are really bright with a lot of branches, new branches splitting off. That's where a lot of the activity is happening. And then we start moving. We're flying. We're following one of the paths, one offshoot, one of the main branches. And we flash past some of these objects that float in space. And they're protein models. They're colorful molecular blobs, constantly moving, changing shape. And we zoom in very close to one of them, and it fills our whole field of vision. And there's a sound here too, a kind of humming sound, some dimension of the protein's property, which has been sonified so we can hear it. What the protein really looks like is like a giant moving sculpture. There's two pieces, one big and round and one more like a pair of scissors. They come together and come apart and come together and come apart. And the round blob is a piece of a protein that gets mutated in cancer. And the scissors are the drug protein. And the idea is to find a design that unfolds when it meets the cancer protein and releases a payload that kills the cancer cell. But right now, it's looking like it's not stable. The scissors are kind of wobbly. And every time it touches the other protein, they move a bit differently. And then Lumi starts manipulating it. Now with eye tracking and EEG sensors in her glasses, she really just needs to look and think to change the protein sequence, add some new bits or remove them. And she does it really, really fast. If you remember those old YouTube videos of teenagers playing Fortnite and building these incredible structures in an eye blink. And then I realize she's not doing it alone. There are these little fireflies swarming around different parts of the protein. And those are markers for where the other ghosts are looking. It's like a heat map of their eyes. And they're making changes too. They've been attracted here by Lumi's attention, and they're helping her to play with this design. It's a bit like telepathy. And what it probably feels like is when you're editing a Google Doc with a few other people, and you're about to fix a spelling error, and then somebody else does it for you, and it just magically happens. But it's a 3D version of that, and it's much faster. And the protein keeps morphing. And some notes and annotations and links to papers jump into being around the protein as well, and they get their own swarms of attention fireflies. And eventually, the scissor protein looks quite different. And now it's more like a switchblade that opens and closes very reliably. And Lumi brings up a chat window. So there's a bunch of conversation. It looks like the team has found a new useful domain. And some of the other team members are actually putting in an order to a robotic cloud lab that will test this design in cancer cells. And a few variants of the protein are popping up in space around us, and some fireflies are streaming towards them and leaving trails of light behind. And for the most successful designs in this project, the Guild is actually recruiting patients for clinical trials. So you can take off your glasses now. And this is what Lumi said. Do you see now, Dad? I don't want a bullshit job. I want this job. And I realized that she was right. So if you put all these things together, a ghost job, being a ghost worker, is now actually better than what the economist David Graeber called bullshit jobs. These meaningless paper-pushing jobs that apparently the vast majority of work in the developed world in the early 21st century actually consists of. But Lumi has a chance to do things she enjoys, things she's good at, anywhere in the world she wants. And she has this sense of community and connections to other people around the world. They spend time in these virtual spaces together or work side by side with face-to-face interactions through mixed reality. They're actually co-workers. And she really feels responsible for their well-being. That last part is very important. It implies that the ghost guilds could actually be the kind of organization we need to solve truly global problems. Just like the corporations defined the 20th century, maybe the guilds will define the 21st. And a lot of the new ghost workers who've just come online live in areas affected by climate change. And they've discovered that they have these superpowers of collaboration. So some of them are now volunteering to leverage those abilities to solve their local problems, which are also global problems. Figuring out how to build water systems, how to build shelters for climate refugees, how to scale up education of women. And even though their problems are local, they have this worldwide community behind them, which is willing to help. There's some kind of poetic justice to the fact that the relentless drive to make AI better ended up accidentally creating a collective intelligence of humans that is not just smarter, but kinder. And it happened the way our children grow up, organically, suddenly, unexpectedly. And we'll never stop worrying about our children, but our collective mind children can look after themselves and us and the planet now. And a lot of the ideas that made that possible came from the people in this room 20 years ago in 2019. Thank you very much.
That was better than I could have possibly hoped for. That was fantastic. Fantastic. Just one more round for Hannu. So we have a couple mics for a little bit of Q&A afterwards. So if you have a question, raise your hand. So we have Eric. I don't know if you want to come up here and fight or something. You know.
No, that is exactly the vision I have. So I'm quite struck by. I very much left the work I did hopeful that that could be the outcome, and I'm curious as you were writing this if there were moments of doubt or hesitation or skepticism that snuck in. Because I know when I was writing the book, there were moments where I thought, am I just being too optimistic? And so I'm curious at what moments might have caught you where you thought, I don't know if I can believe this.
Yeah, I don't completely want to break the illusion there, but I guess the kinds of questions I had was, is it really true? Do we really know that collectives of humans and machines can ultimately outperform AI, or will there be need for human creativity and labor? I mean, I strongly personally believe that there is and there will be for a very long time. And I think we should deliberately push things that in that direction. But I think the sort of, and whether I guess another source of doubt was, do the big tech companies now have so much power that this sort of more grassroots organization will not be able to sort of displace or change the power dynamic? But I'm kind of, I want to remain optimistic and hopeful and quiet those doubting voices. And I think it's really up to us to decide how we want to change things.
Thank you. First of all, Thank you. This was amazing and really inspiring. Second of all, working for Google, I want to say we do plan to be still relevant, not just existing, but relevant in 20 years. Third, I wanted to kind of following up on this question of optimism and how do you maintain it? How do you explain it? And how do you counteract this, what I think is the current global vibe of a little bit of a fin de siècle, a little bit of a melancholy, with this optimism and this belief in the notion that some things will work out right?
So I think first of all, I'm actually quite a big fan of Google, and my company is doing some work with you guys. So there's
good to know.
No hard feelings, I hope. But on the second point, so personally, I think my source of hope actually is young people. So I was recently at a conference which was about community biology. So young people creating grassroots community labs to do citizen science all around the world. And they were just so inspiring. Like they were not pessimistic at all. They were completely convinced they were going to take these tools and fix climate change and solve all our problems and their own local problems. And I think, and that's just biology, which is, at least for now, a bit less scalable than what we can do on the web. So I think if that spirit is there also with young people doing experimental things with either crowd work or social networks or crypto or whatever, then I think there are reasons to be hopeful. It's maybe just us who are jaded and cynical.
So in order to get to the future that we want, do you think that the scientific community should do a better job at creating narratives that are a little bit like the one that you just had, as opposed to what we hear from the scientific community that unfortunately, recently has also come under fire for a bunch of wrong reasons? But I wonder if, the model that you have, which is trying to inspire people towards a future that we all like, if it came from the scientific community where, there's some legitimacy also from a factual standpoint, would help build up, bridge that gap, if you think about it.
That's a great question. And storytelling certainly is a very, very powerful tool to direct human attention and energy towards specific goals. And I think, absolutely. There have been some deliberate projects to try to do things like that. There was University of Arizona had this project that Neil Stevenson initiated called Project Hieroglyph, which deliberately set out to create positive visions of the future, and in particular, like specific technological artifacts from that future that could be potentially built. But I think it would be very fruitful to have a sort of a more diverse engagement of science practitioners and artists and writers, also visual artists and filmmakers and all that. Right now we have Black Mirror, so I think we should be able to do better than that. I think there's always a tension between in storytelling between sort of wanting to go for the easy conflicts and negative emotions, because that's just tends to respond to our lizard brains respond more strongly to that. But I think it is really possible to have a overall tone of hopefulness and still tell interesting stories with human conflict. And I think I would certainly be all for those kinds of efforts.
Let's get the mic because we'll get on with it.
So the bit of your story that I liked the most was the idea of people solving local problems and then having a network that helps scale them globally. I think that's an awesome idea, and because I'm basically a teacher, I try to encourage students that they're at least in the U.S. so focused on writing critical essays, and I'm like, I don't want to read another critical essay for the rest of my life. I want you to pick a problem you can actually solve and solve it. And I'm just curious where you got that from and whether you see opportunities for that. Is that something you see in Silicon Valley? And I think we need that as a cultural thing for people to pick small things. They don't have to be unicorns. They're just any real problem
So probably the specific idea I was exposed to a few years ago by talking to Chris Fabian, who's technologist who's for a while been leading UNICEF's innovation efforts, and he described some experiences where whenever his team tried to make a product and in New York and take it to sub-Saharan Africa or India or wherever, it practically always failed miserably. But the real answer was empowering the locals and giving them platforms that they could use to build solutions to problems that they really uniquely understood. And the same was also echoed at this community bio conference that I mentioned. So I think there's at least some anecdotal empirical evidence that approach should work better.
So I love science fiction, and I can't wait to read all your books. So I'm super excited about this. So what I'm imagining, though, is I feel like there would be like an Elysium to this, where you have like the world that you just. So Elysium is like the spaceship where like everyone's happy, and then it's like made possible by everyone on Earth that is in like bad situation. So I love what you just described, and I'm like, wouldn't it be cool? But I read too much science fiction, and I'm like, I know how this ends for some people. So I feel like at present, there are groups that are like honestly like marginalized and stigmatized, and you're describing something that sounds super cool. So I love the way your mind works. So I just wanted to hear you sort of think through, do you have ideas for how we get from like this world where there are like really marginalized people to like, where this like little Finnish girl, so I love what turns out for her, like how does everyone kind of like get there?
Well, I mean, I wish I knew the exact steps, so we could try to execute them together. But I kind of I have a general feeling that since we're dealing with such complex human systems here, there's no plan we can really come up with and execute. It's going to be this evolving thing. But maybe we just need a compass. Like maybe we just need to have a very clear vision of what we want and what we're aiming for and what our values are, and then each step of the way we try to embrace those values. I think Joe Ito, the head of MIT Media Lab, likes to talk about compasses versus maps. So with this community or trying to aim for this kind of future, I would perhaps think about what kind of compass do we need to get there, which maybe is trying to do as much we can to empower the people who are disempowered now, and try to respect their autonomy and sort of I think Mary especially outlined many actionable principles that we can try to follow.
Short question: who is your favorite science fiction writer?
So that changes a lot. I think my canonical favorite is a little less known author called Ian MacDonald, who has an amazing book called Desolation Road, which is like 100 Years of Solitude, but on Mars. So magic realism and science fiction. And I guess the other one I would name, who I've also mentioned to people here today, would be Ursula Le Guin, who recently passed away. So her writing just continues to astonish me. So yeah. That's a couple of examples.
I love this. This is great. So I was wondering, when I think about today's society and the growth of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the idea that we can have these, neural networks, and they come up with these algorithms that can explain things or predict things that we wouldn't have been able to ourselves necessarily. And I think how that ties into your story here of this like tension between the relationship between computers and algorithms and people. I guess I was wondering, kind of just more like speculatively, your thoughts on like the role of free will in this relationship, because there's always this dynamic between, are we controlling these algorithms for our own purposes to create meaning for ourselves? Like your daughter is enjoying, like the end goal for her is meaning, and that's enjoyment for her. So just just curious, like your role of that kind of classic tension that exists when we think about like bots and people, or algorithms and people, and the relationship between the two.
So that's a really interesting question. I think one book I would maybe refer you to is Darwin Amongst the Machines by George Dyson, which is it's actually not a recent book. It's about 20 years old, but it feels incredibly contemporary. And so what Dyson does is he describes this process of how we've basically co-evolved with machines and technology, and he connects that all the way back to the origins of life, and this idea that there are these coupled systems that evolve together. From the origins of life, it's really like vesicles and cells, and then the replicating genetic element inside them, and how the sequence, the DNA shapes the structure, and vice versa, and you have this iterative loop. And he argues that now that process has started happening with basically the human machine systems we've been building. So there's code that now affects the way we run the real world, which then in turn shapes the code. So I think maybe if there is free will, maybe it's now at a higher level in the system, which is this sort of techno-organic complex of human beings and machines that's emerging. So I think we will probably, as we sort of further merge with machines, also redefine where the boundaries of our identity lie, which it's already quite blurry. But there is this whole philosophical school of the embodied mind, where it's actually hard to distinguish where the boundary between what's inside our brains and in the tools we use as part of identity lies. So I don't know if that's a terribly informative answer, but it's just some thoughts.
I'll ask a question. So now over the last month or two, you've gotten to, as an outsider, but still trained as a scientist, as a quantum physicist, you've gotten to know kind of the work that a lot of us do here. You've been at the conference and seen a lot of things that have happened. You've imagined this amazing future and, grappled, as Mary said, with some of the challenges about how you would reach that. What are some things, what are some of the things that you think this community should be working on? What do you think this community has to offer that could solve some of the problems that you've, imagined?
So something I'd be curious to see, and I think this came up in a couple of conversations I had here, was how to more rapidly deploy these ideas in the wild. How to actually, I've seen a lot of really amazing research, and really grateful for the opportunity to learn from all of you. But I think somebody mentioned that a lot of these this work is really often small, discrete experiments in a somewhat artificial setting, and I just wonder whether that principle of giving the tools to the people could somehow be embraced more. So I'd be curious if anyone has any thoughts on how to do that.
Okay, well, that sounds like a challenge for tomorrow. So with that, please, let's thank Hannu one more time.